Let's not lose sight of the need for, solidarity. Who wants to create a world where everything's towards competition and the solidarity, the kind of fundamental goodness and kindness, within humanity? Why are we afraid these days to speak up for solidarity? Why do we associate that with some kind of, counter to competition or counter to growth?
Hello, I'm San Bilal from ECDPM, the think and do tank working on European and international relations. And it's my pleasure today to welcome Simon O'Connell. Thanks for joining us today. You are the CEO of SNV, the Netherlands Development Organization. Can you tell us what kind of animal is SNV?
Thank you, San. So it's great to be here, and thanks so much for setting up this conversation. We call ourselves a global development partner. We were indeed formed within the Dutch government's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1965. We became independent from Dutch government in 2002, and now we work with a whole range of global partners, governments and private sector, and other development agencies in close to 25 countries around the world. We focus on agri-food, energy, and water, with these key thematic areas of gender equality and social inclusion, climate adaptation and mitigation, and strong institutions and effective governance, really integral to our work in trying to create or contribute to a more lasting, deeper, systemic change.
And you have just celebrated your 60th anniversary. I was at your big party. Can you tell us what you have achieved over the last 60 years?
Indeed, SMB was established in 1965, so this is our 60th year, and we worked with thousands and thousands of partners and private sector groups and governments around the world over those 60 years to try and catalyze change. And I always say to our team at SMB, we're a contributor to change. And some of those contributions, we're rightly very grateful to have been a part of and proud of. So things like enabling the establishment now of 1 million biodigesters worldwide, some of the innovative financing mechanisms, particularly around results-based financing, that we were a sort of early adopter of a couple of decades back. Very large-scale dairy sector systems transformation work, particularly in East Africa, large-scale youth employment and entrepreneurship initiatives over the years, and a lot of work to try and establish better governance systems, particularly around water, sanitation, and hygiene, and of course supporting thousands and thousands of agribusinesses, agribusiness SMEs over the years. So it was an important moment to really recognize that milestone. But then the real moment part that we wanted to create a discussion around was, these are extraordinarily turbulent and challenging times in the world. So on the one hand, we've got these rising levels of extreme poverty, myriad of pervasive or protracted crises and conflict. We've of course got the climate crisis. We've got, extraordinarily and increasingly high numbers of displacement, backsliding towards the SDGs, etc., however one wants to frame these challenges. And then on the other hand, we've got declining funding, breakdown in rules-based systems, falling levels of trust, and frankly, really a kind of fracturing, fragmentation, and fearfulness, to go on with the Fs, for the future, pretty much everywhere. We recognize, as I'm sure there can't be a development or international cooperation act out there who doesn't realize that we need to be markedly different from what we were when we were founded in 1965. Frankly, we need to be markedly different to what we were 20 years ago, or perhaps even 10 years ago.
Try to unpack
Yeah.
because you're giving a lot of information. In fact, I can see that 60 years, of course, brings a lot of insights and perspectives. But let's try to
Mhm.
unpack perhaps some of these elements. You started by saying, outlining some of the great achievements that you have been, that SNV has achieved in partnership also with other actors
Yeah.
in terms of development. Yet, as you indicated, in the development context now, or in the global context now, there is a really challenge about the merits of doing development and saying, well, we're not doing well. So how do you experience that, and what is your reflection? Because on the one hand, you have a lot to show of how effective. So is it simply a question of narrative? Is it a question of the type of engagement? How do you situate yourself in this context where people are challenging the merits of development and development cooperation in particular, and the way we have engaged, and saying perhaps we should do it differently?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Big question there, San. And, over certainly the years that I've been involved in the sort of humanitarian and development space, there has, part of why there's been a declining trust is because there has been a sense that we've been overly fueling competition, that there's been not enough real sincerity around partnering better together in order to, leave behind those more sustainable or larger scale impacts. So it's the collaboration piece that I think has got to be central to our future. How do we enable better forms of collaboration during these times of heightened or heightening competition? I'll give you an example. So, we have been in the practitioners network for the last almost 15 years. So it's
Can you tell us
26.
what is the practitioners
Yeah,
network?
so it's 26 or so. It's been expanding recently. European Development Cooperation Agency. We held the presidency 3 years back. We, along with our partner Fiat from Spain, we managed during that time to sign a statement of intent to collaborate more deeply across practitioner network members, EDFIs, the European DFI, and JEFIC, right?
Yeah,
We,
JEFIC is the grouping of public development banks, European
there
Public
you go.
Development.
In part, Sam, building on the momentum of Finance in Common and other initiatives to try and get the DFIs or IFIs to work better together, as it were. But what we see is there is still too much fragmentation, one between the practitioner organizations like SNV, and two between the practitioner organizations and those more innovative financing instruments that we know now more than ever we need to better harness because your ODA, your official development assistance financing, is shrinking. So
And
we have to bridge the gap. We have to get the grant monies to be more truly catalytic, and we have to go further in promoting new ways of working together. And I know that's easy to say and hard to do.
I mean, that sounds very nice. My question is, aren't we now having, in a sense, almost an old-fashioned type of discussion around how development actors can work better together?
Mm,
Where in the context, and I think as you mentioned the word already before, a global gateway,
yeah.
seems to be, which is the new approach at the European level, seems to be much more about combining the interest of European member states and the European Union with these interest for development in what the European Commission called these mutually beneficial partnerships. And in the Netherlands, we see these also. I mean, this is in a sense not really new in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands has always been also quite prone on using the Dutch comparative advantage of its own private sector and expertise to try to engage in development.
Mm,
So, how do you were mentioning, in fact, the difficulties of cooperation and that there are some pilots among development actors, but now we're saying it's not just about development actors if you want to be relevant, but it's also about these European private sector actors,
Yeah.
be it
Yeah.
companies or financiers. So perhaps if you could tell us first in the Netherlands, so
Yeah.
what do you see on the Team Netherlands? The European Commission is very keen on having a lot of team nationals. So
Yep.
how does it work in the Team Netherlands? And then perhaps we can go to the European level and what does it mean
Yeah.
concretely for Global Gateway?
Sure. So I'll try and get to that, but I might, if you'll allow me, frame it a little bit differently. I So let's be clear as well. SMB, we became independent from Dutch government in 2002. We still receive less than half, but a significant volume of our annual revenues come with the support of the Dutch government, primarily the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we're we're also deeply grateful for that support and proud of sort of harnessing some of those kind of key elements of technical expertise that one might be inclined to think, are, particularly Dutch, or the Dutch do have some sort of particular, from the Netherlands, there are particular areas of technical expertise or competencies that are important to share, learn from, and build from in the countries where we work around the world. I think and you struck me on the old fashioned thing. I think, there are the danger in these kind of very difficult or turbulent moments is what one can think, well, everything needs to go, everything needs to be different. I don't think it is that. I think if you think of things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or some of the founding principles of multilateralism and multilateral institutions, they're really precious, and we should
Yeah, and
hold.
that's what the EU is saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
talking
it's
about
about it's
promoting European
making yeah,
values and principles and so on. So it's not to say that development principle and these general values are not have no merits, but it
yeah,
seems that the drive, both I would say in the Netherlands and also at the European level, is about how can we, in trying to promote these values and promoting development, how can we benefit also ourselves and bring our own,
yeah,
in particular, our own interests in Europe and our own private sector. So,
yeah,
but my question, in fact, is how do you fit in this kind
yeah.
of narrative?
So I'll come to that, and I think, as I said at the Peace Palace some weeks back, for me, I see it as principled and pragmatic. Yeah, you want both. The kind of line that I came across recently is the Jacques Delors one, around what we need is competition that stimulates, cooperation that strengthens, and solidarity that unites. And San, I worry really deeply that if we lose sight of the three elements there, and if we go too hard on the competition that stimulates, that's a race to the bottom. And let me try and explain a bit what I mean by that.
Mhm.
So, it'd be very hard for anyone to agree to disagree that the climate crisis is a globally shared crisis. Of course, the burden is vastly unequal, but it's a global issue. This is about our shared future, all of us. Yeah. So we need solidarity there. We'd be mad, from the Netherlands or from Europe to start competing with China on solar voltaic panels. Yeah, there's such a comparative advantage. There is such a kind of pace of acceleration of the technologies, and the price points coming down. So there's an opportunity for really collaboration around that. As an aside, by the way, I think the US policy of clear choice, vis-a-vis China from about 2018 was, one of the biggest policy missteps over recent decades. So we should be
Do you
looking.
think collaboration with China on the green transition, that's what you have in mind?
Yeah, I do. I think, you can have clear choices on some things, and then you can also be clear in your choices around where collaboration can be mutually beneficial and is necessary. So we should be looking to stimulate through competition things like adoption of solar irrigation, which enables increased productivity of climate resilient crops and vegetables. Yeah, that's a stimulation part. We shouldn't lose sight, and you just used those words, San, comparative advantage. Harnessing Dutch expertise in water management or agri inputs and technologies, great. Let's recognize there's a comparative advantage there. Let's, within the European framework, recognize that there's been some really interesting things happening from Estonia around digital governance, and actually saw one, Team Europe initiative collaboration a few years ago around Estonia and others in Somalia around digital governance.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful comparative advantage there. Let's say the same around perhaps German manufacturing or Belgian pharmaceuticals. So competition and stimulating the competition on the back of comparative advantage. So the same framework should be used for development agencies. We should be much more focused and much more honest around what we're good at and what we're less good at, or what we don't have a comparative advantage around. So better sharing of resources, sharper metrics around impact, not revenues for individual organizations such as SMB, but the impact metrics, and then do better around a measurement framework which is based more around contribution than attribution. But San, so on the Tide Aid thing, so going to cooperation and solidarity, we should be looking to enable much better cooperation around, refugees, displacement, migration. We need the rules-based systems. We need a, rule of law. We need an upholding of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we need the burden sharing. You can't tie aid all around that. Yeah, that's where you need your cooperation. And the real danger here is if we tie all ODA, grant, or whatever it ends up being called, monies into competition and leveraging private sector investment. There's two big things which I worry will happen. One, will fragment further, as we'll actually exacerbate the competition both between Europe, China, and the US. And then, frankly, despite all the language of Team Europe, the danger is at a time of diminishing resources that will actually exacerbate the competition between European nations ourselves. And then the second equally big point is, you know, will exacerbate disparities as the investment sizes, will be steered inherently towards bigger, lower risk, quicker returns, because that's the capitalist global system that we live in. So the Nigers, the Central African republics, the South Sudans, the Haitis, the Yemens, they'll be left further and further behind. And that's a vicious cycle of kind of fueling further conflict, displacement, inequality, and that will affect us all. So that's really, for me, San, to your point, tie what can be tied well together. Yeah, that's your stimulating part. Yeah, that's your stimulating of competition. That's how you get your innovations to come in. But cooperate where you can strengthen, and then let's not lose sight of the need for solidarity. Who wants to create a world where everything's towards competition, and the solidarity, the kind of fundamental goodness and kindness, within humanity? Why are we afraid these days to speak up for solidarity? Why do we associate that with some kind of counter to competition or counter to growth? I refuse to believe, and you'll know, San, there was an Ipsos poll recently that showed over 60% of people actually are inclined to support international development cooperation. Those people, like all of us, in our lives, in our work, with our families. We want solidarity. So let's get the narrative right. Let's reclaim it. And that's not old fashioned. That's not taking us back. That's just a fabulous opportunity to build a better world that's possible, you know?
Well, Simon, thanks a lot for your passion, and I think these elements that you mentioned, competition, cooperation, but also your passion plea for solidarity will resonate with many of us. Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Simon.
No, hey, thanks for giving me the time, Sam. Thank you.
Thanks.